And with that, the Ashes are done. Wisden would like to give a huge thank you to RIVERSTONE Living for supporting our Ashes Daily podcasts. They're a wonderful team, and with residences that appeal to everyone, it really is an incredible place. Check them out and even book in for a tour at www.riverstoneliving.com. Hello and welcome to the final Wisden Ashes Daily podcast. It finishes 4-1 to Australia. It was arguably an apt finish. Australia comfortable, deserving winners in the end, but it wasn't totally straightforward. Chasing 160 after Jacob Bethel, Matt Potts and Josh Tongue added 40 to England's overnight score. Australia got to the target 5 down, but not without one moment of controversy and one final England drop to help get them there. I'm Yas and with me today is Ben Gardner. Ben, it's finally done. Was there any point today where you thought England actually had somewhat of a chance?
Maybe like two brief moments, maybe three brief moments. One, the period sort of between Bethel's LBW review early on and him getting out, when you sort of think like, oh, okay, maybe he does somehow survive this new ball period, which he was looking to actually kind of knuckle through. And then England can get up to a sort of 180-ish, 200 lead on a pitch that is looking like it's turning a bit. And then something weird happens, basically. Sort of thinking that possibly. And then with the ball, I guess the Weatherald moment, which you said, but also just the period between the ball leaving the bat and it being dropped by Jacob Bethel. Like that was probably the big one, really, is that like if that happens, and I know it's only 12 or so runs Labuschagne adds after that in a small chase, that's quite big. If he takes that and it's so soon after, like so soon into that middle session, you can sort of think like maybe England can really start to heap pressure on, as it always felt like England needed like even 30 more runs to have a sniff at kind of every stage of that chase, and that's kind of how it proved, I guess.
One moment of controversy today. England went up for a caught behind for Jake Weatherald when he was on 16 off the bowling of Cast. Given not out, England review. There is a snicko murmur around the point, liberal use of the word around the point the ball passed the bat. It's not overturned. England and Bryden Cast in particular are furious. Possibly something that the match referee will look at. Ben, did the umpires make a mistake there?
I personally don't think so. I can see why England are annoyed because, you know, people always say, all we want is consistency. And the issue here wasn't the timing of the noise, which has been at other points in the series. It was the type of noise. So in terms of the frame was just after the ball's past the bat, which is fine, but it's not a clear spike. It is, as you say, it's a bit of roughage, like a bit of like it's sort of like a rubbing together of something rather than like a snick, if you see what I mean. So that's like so I don't think there's been an error. I mean, the more fundamental thing is that snicko is just a poor technology, which means the TV umpire is always sort of guessing to an extent, and that's the issue. But I think actually in this instance, I don't think there was I think I understand the decision made. The thing is like if the match referee does decide to have a look at it, Cast could be in a bit of trouble, basically. Like if we want to get into that, what you're not allowed to do in the playing conditions is inappropriate physical contact with a player or umpire, and that doesn't bar all physical contact, as we saw on day 2 when Stokes put his arm around Labuschagne, but that was deemed to be fine, not inappropriate. And I think that it will probably deem this not inappropriate because it was just a hand on the arm rather than anything more aggressive. If you're unhappy with someone clearly and you put your hand on them, they might take that view. And then actually in the code of conduct, if you are deemed to have inappropriately contacted an umpire, it has to be a level 3 or 4 offence. It can't be level 1 or 2. And then that is when you're getting to the more serious sort of like bans rather than just a demerit point territory. But I think he will just fall on the right side of it. But I can see when we're annoyed, even though I think the decision was right overall.
Tongue took 3 for to finish the series with 18 wickets at 20 from his 3 appearances. Could have been 4. Another missed opportunity. The drop catch of Labuschagne by the golden boy Bethel. Tough but catchable. Labuschagne added a further 16 runs. Labuschagne was eventually run out. At the time of the run out, Australia are 5 down with 39 runs still to get. Stranger things have happened. England had a couple of opportunities they didn't take. Australia rode their luck a little bit early doors too, several plays and misses. And I know, Ben, that this is a day 5 daily, but as much as the story of day 4 was the Bethel 100. How big was that collapse actually around him? Brook, Jacks, Smith and Stokes falling in quick succession, 3 falling to the very part-time off breaks of Bo Webster, who admits himself he doesn't really bowl it that much even in practice, and then obviously the run out of Jamie Smith. On the pitch, by the way, I thought this was a very good pitch, not in that it was a total road, but it offered something for everyone. There was turn in the last couple of days. There was something in it for the seamers, I think, pretty much throughout the test match. But also conditions were pretty good for batting, especially against the old ball. And in that period yesterday where England have that collapse, it's against the old ball. And sure, Webster had some turn, but they were not conditions where you'd expect a collapse like that.
Yeah, and okay, so first of all, on the pitch, everyone was very quick to credit it after play. And even Steve Smith was almost a bit contrite in saying it was brilliant, having almost like criticised it before he played on it. It was interesting him saying that what he thought it was going to do was that the cracks were going to widen up, and therefore it was going to go up and down basically, and that's why you want your quicks. And they didn't expect it to develop so much rough. And I think that shows why teams should pick spinners more than they do, because as much as you might be good at reading a pitch, you never quite know what it's going to do. So if you misread it, if you hedge your bets a bit, then you have an attack that can, bowl, that can do something no matter what the pitch does. And so you saw, so relevant there, that Webster is, a part-time off spinner, but a reasonably handy one, probably better than we'd expect, especially because he says himself he doesn't really practice it. But yes, it's so frustrating, especially obviously, the Jacks moment, which I think Cricket Info did do a piece I saw to catch about trying to rank which is England's worst dismissal of the series, and that's right up there. And especially because so much of England's worst moments have come with someone batting brilliantly at the other end, which is what the Jamie Smith moment was in the first innings of this game. You think back to the pink ball test and the wickets lost to Stark. Just the lights were setting in and Root was batting brilliantly. It's that almost they can't just bat in tandem with someone who's kind of going about their business. They feel like if someone is sort of ticking along at one end, maybe they need to take the attack at the other end rather than just being like, why can't we just have 2 guys who are bedding in, or one guy batting at a normal tempo, the other guy using that opportunity to bed in, rather than feeling like, right, I'm going to take the game on here. Yeah, so frustrating and a missed opportunity. And one of many, many, many moments that we'll look back on and think, if it had gone their way, then maybe the series would have been different, albeit 4-1, absolutely a fair scoreline, and Australia definitely all better than England.
Some nice moments at the end of the day. Khawaja receiving a warm ovation from his home crowd in his final test appearance. Stark receiving the Player of the Series award ahead of Travis Head, who received the Player of the Match award. Do you reckon that's fair? Stark overhead for Player of the Series?
Just about. It's tricky because this has been a ball-dominated series overall, and you look at Travis Head's work across. He's aced a whole range of conditions. Obviously, that kind of freak innings in the first test, and then even in the other 2 days, he was the second top scorer in the game after Brook, I think. So you can see a guy who has actually, like, in comparison to Brook was, able to sort of use his attacking instincts to play important innings in those games, but couldn't put together the big innings in the games where conditions were more in his favour. Travis Head is able to do both. His only issues that he gets out when he's between 150 and 175, which is quite a good problem to have. And so for a guy to crack 600 runs in a series that has been more dominated by the ball versus a guy who's taken 30 wickets at 20, but when you had Cast averaging not dissimilar before, at certain points in the series, you look at it that way. But I think in the live test, especially, Stark was more important to Australia winning those. So it's just about fair, but it's a very, very close thing. And just one thing on Travis Head, a stat that I found before we started recording, he's the most Player of the Match winningest player in Test history. Obviously with the caveat that these only go back to sort of the start of the 80s, but in terms of percentage of matches in which you win the Player of the Match award, with a cut for 25 test, he wins the most. It's 11 out of 65. Next is Wazzy Makram with, I think, 17 out of just over 100. So that shows that thing we say about Head, that the sort of ineffable thing that he stands up in key moments. It can be hard to define, but that's the way to define it. And he is the best there's been, at least at this point.
He scores consequential hundreds, doesn't he? He hasn't. It was amazing early in the series. We're looking at his record and comparing it to Ollie Pope, and the two of them have played a very similar number of test matches. And I think after Perth, I think Head had only scored 2 more test hundreds than Ollie Pope. And you're like, how are their records so similar when you feel that they're such different players? I know Pope has scored the occasional really important 100. But with Head, it feels like every time he gets a big score, it has a massive part in an Australia victory. And I suppose that stat reflects that. Quick fun game, Ben. Two of our listeners, Toby and Ben, who've been out in Australia, have sent in a team of the series. What do you think of their team of the series? Head and Crawley up top. Joe Root at 3. Even though he doesn't like batting at 3. Steve Smith, captain at 4. Harry Brook at 5. Alex Carey with the gloves at 6. Stokes, 7. Then a bowling attack of Nisa, Stark, Boland and Tongue.
Okay, let me work that through. So openers, I think that's all you can do really. I mean, it can't be Weatherald, can't be Duckett. So there you go. Root at 3 is a big fudge, and that would be the most fun discussion to have really. Is like out of all the people who batted number 3, which is quite a lot when you know Steve Smith did it for an innings. So you might think,
Cast.
Yes, yeah. That would be a fun shout. I guess almost the one that could challenge most possibly would actually be Stokes. And would you even go for, a Webster who was pretty decisive in this game? Obviously, Stokes bowled brilliantly in that first game, but it's almost bizarre looking at his record and realizing that did Duckett get more runs in this series in the end? I think he might have done. Whereas I think of Stokes having battled really hard, made 250s, and Duckett having basically been out within the first 10 overs every time he played, and yet somehow he's done that. So Stokes is maybe the one that I'd question, but I think that's probably fair, apart from the Root fudge.
Yeah, I think the one change I'll make to an otherwise very good team, I'd have Stokes in as a bowling all-rounder at 7. I think that's fair enough. His numbers with the ball were good, and he did bowl well throughout the series. I'd have Bethel in there at 3 as someone who actually scored runs at 3, and probably drop Root, and then the fudge would be drop Brook, and the fudge would be to have Smith or Root at 5, basically. Bethel scoring 150 at 3, I think should get him in at 3. On somebody we haven't talked enough about this series, who is included in that team of the series as a should, Scott Boland. I thought he had a brilliant series in the same way that I think Bryden Cast's figures flattered him. I think even though Scott Boland takes 20 wickets at 24.95, I think those numbers don't do him justice how well he bowled at times. It always feels like when England's best players are in, when the conditions are reasonably flat, he is the one who makes batting as difficult as any bowler on either side. Mitchell Stark, rightly the bowler of the series. Tongue is England's bowler of the series. But Boland was just so difficult to get away. And that spell yesterday to Joe Root, number 1 batter in the world, someone who's got 160 in the first innings, he couldn't hit him off the square. Like, there are a few times where Boland had spells like that this series. And actually quite an underrated bowler. And I hold my hands up, especially after that first innings at Perth, when England really attacked him. He went at more than 6s. I didn't think he had this sort of tour in him. Against a side who had found a way to have some success against him in 2023, for him to bounce back in that adversity with a bit of pressure as well. Australia bringing in a large group of seamers this series out of necessity. It was very possible that someone like a Nisa, a Doggett or a Richardson would surpass him in that hierarchy. And he's established himself. And it's extraordinary that he's not necessarily someone who's an automatic pick when everyone's available. And then I guess the other thing I just wanted to finish on from the cricket today was just how brutal was that for Matt Potts, not used when I know he had a really tough outing in the first innings, none for 141, but Bryden Cast, 8 overs, none for 51, when you're only defending 160. Really, really tough test for Potts.
Yeah, and so on Cast, in a series of weird stats, he's got the second best strike rate by an England quick in an Ashes series in the past 130 or 120 years, which speaks to a guy who can take wickets, but also is going to go for runs, and that then leads into Boland, as you just said, that you can almost a bit like in T20 cricket, when you have in your head, you used to adjust in your head that it's no longer 6, it's a good economy rate, it's 7, and it's no longer 7, that's good, it's 8. With Boland going at 3.2, you might think you might sort of shrug your shoulders a bit as sort of like a sort of median sort of economy rate, whereas actually against this England team, it's kind of extraordinary to go that well. But yeah, Potts, really, really feel for him. Obviously, there's been a bit said that has he been thrown to the wolves a bit, having to come in cold in this Test match, which is fair to an extent. But I think there is a story with him when we sort of wondered why England haven't been picking him and having a look at him. If you was just watching him bowl, even for Durham this season. He's not quite the guy who came in at the start of 2022 and was taking 5 foot basically every time he bowled. There has just been a little bit of regression there, and it was exposed in basically the most brutal way possible on a pitch that didn't offer absolutely loads to a bowler to his particular skills. And yeah, that's tough. But I think the thing that people always say about him is that he's his attitude is really good, and he will come again basically. But it's a very, very tough day at the office.
Yeah, as we discussed yesterday, there's not exactly a long list of seamers banging on the door outside the group that England selected here. So yeah, he certainly harmed his chances of being involved in the immediate future. But again, I can't really see a situation where he's completely discarded because of this, even though I think it's unlikely he'll play a part at the start of next summer. And finally, before we get to the after show on the Patreon channel, Ben Stokes did an interesting interview with TNT after play today.
Yeah, well, there was quite a lot of interesting chat. Just, as these reflections on the series often are, Stokes basically being asked what went wrong and what needs to change, and on stuff that wasn't new but expressed maybe in a different sort of way. So with what he thinks is going wrong with England, how he puts his team to sort of work them out a bit. And I think in particular, what he thinks is that when England are kind of going pretty well but not dominant, that's when they let teams back into the game by basically making decisions. He called them 3 out of 10 decisions. So just decisions that come off 3 out of 10 times, basically. And it means that when England are behind in the game and they're taking those decisions, then actually that's what gets them back into games. But when they're sort of on top, but not, overwhelmingly on top, that's what lets teams back in. And that's almost I think that is also a change from the early days of baseball, when the principles of smart attacking batting still hold true, as we've seen from Head in this series. But you've got to pick your moments and pick your bowlers. And England have been almost pointedly not doing that, feeling like they have to take down every bowler. And that is, going back to the point that we made about who when they've lost those wickets to really, really dumb shots, is also was Rob Key's word at some point in the series. It's been when actually someone's been going really well and you just play the supporting hand and you end up getting into a really, really good position. So that was very interesting. And also talking about the demands of the schedule, which are less so on Stokes than on the rest. And so basically saying that the work to rebuild things starts now. Obviously reiterates that support for McCullum and for Rob Key, as you'd very much expect him to, but saying that that they want to do that work from now, basically, or from have a little bit of a break, but then be thinking right, how do we make this team as good as it can be? Because the bones are still there to an extent, but there's also quite a lot that they can do to improve it, I guess.
I find it quite interesting that there's almost a sense of surprise in that these problems exist, because I think some of the things that Stokes has identified are not exactly brand new issues. And if you do a total history of the Stokes-McCullum era, I think there's a lack of realisation of the conditions in which they had success in their first year in particular. So if you look at that extraordinary 22 home summer, there were freakish results in there, right? In that first Test match at Lords, where they chased down a total on the final day, it's a route masterclass that gets them over the line. In the second Test match, it's the Bairstow freak innings that gets them over the line. It's a Bairstow freak innings that bails them out from 50 for 5 at Headingley. The Pakistan series were in the most extreme conditions imaginable in terms of how flat it was. These were not normal Test conditions, and also there are a lot of games where they weren't actually doing that well in. I think one of the great what ifs of the Bazball era is, what if Joe Root doesn't score 100 on the first day at Lords? What if Johnny Bairstow doesn't do his thing on the final day at Trent Bridge? If they don't have those 2 positive results, what does that mean for what they try and do? And it's quite interesting again when he's saying that teams have worked out what to do against them. That isn't new to this series. Jason Gillespie, we've talked about it a few times this series. Jason Gillespie, a year ago, after coaching Pakistan to that series win over England at the end of 2024, said that England are quite a predictable team to play against, both in terms of what you do with the bat and what you do with the ball, because ultimately, at some level, they will get bored. That will frustrate a lot of England fans. That there's a sense that some of the issues here are being framed as if they're brand new when they existed before.
Yeah, and I think if you think back to some of those things that you mentioned before, it was about like, and this was when McCullum was, it was about freeing up cricketers who, obviously we talked about this loads, but freeing up cricketers who sort of lost the fun to make decisions themselves and know that if the thinking was sound, then the result wouldn't matter too much, basically. But that kind of relied upon having a group of like those were experienced guys who'd been around loads, and so they knew how to make the right decisions. Basically, like even like Johnny Bairstow, for example, is the guy that applies most to. Like backing him to be able to do that to play with such freedom, that relied on the fact that he had such kind of inherent knowledge built in, and that's what's very different to now when you have many more guys who do actually need just a lot more guidance on what decisions to make, and that's why so that's what so that you can definitely criticize a lot of the decisions that England's batters make, obviously, like the likes of Jackson, Smith, and Pope and others. And with Pope, this probably applies a little bit less, but you do also have guys here who like you might have guys who are really brilliantly talented at some things, like at hitting a 90-mile-per-hour cricket ball, or taking down a spinner or something. But what they might not be really talented at is knowing what the exact right moment to do that is, and that's what you need to be able to. That's so you don't need to just free those guys up. You really need to be able to say to them like, right, let's really work on that, and sometimes just say to them, this is what you're doing now, and that's what is not happening to the same extent, and that comes with the change of personnel too. So I think that's and so because there's been a few sort of pithy observations that that there's the story going around that McCullum and Key can stay as long as the culture changes, and saying like, well, isn't McCullum's whole thing culture? And that is true to an extent, but I think there are also definitely bits of the culture that are good, like the giving players freedom, allowing them to express themselves in this environment that punishes failure so harshly is a thing that not many coaches are able to do. And the principles, as I say, of attacking smart batting really hold up. And that is something, again, that previous England teams have not recognised to the same extent. But there are other bits of the culture that do need to change. And actually, I wanted to bring this point up earlier, talking about the Bethel drop. That was something that McCullum talked about. He said they lost this game in their fielding, and you could point to other examples in the series too. And actually, that also goes to the culture a bit, where there's been like obviously the lack of a fielding coach is different to having like they have batting and bowling coaches, but not to the same extent. But this just general sort of ambivalence to having like a really solid coaching staff that coaches the players and tells them what to do. Like on the bowling side, flipping from having these consultants who were there before the series and then dipping out and dipping back in, and not having someone who they can really trust. And then you see that in how England have bowled, when sometimes it's just kind of not knowing what to do or not having the consistency to know what they are trying to do. And then fielding, like obviously Australia are a brilliant fielding side. I'm not sure England would be able to match up to them even with a proper fielding coach, but that must be possible to improve, right? Like Jack's dropping the catch on the rope is not because he's incapable of taking that catch or not skillful enough. You feel there's mindset things there in Test cricket, like the concentration of fielding as well as just the pure skill of it. But it all speaks to a culture that has regressed on those details a little bit as well. So that's where you can make tweaks to the culture while hopefully still retain the good stuff, and maybe a better team around McCullum can take this team forward. But it would also be based on if you were to do just a performance review of McCullum and just look at, have you done what we hired you to do? Are there errors that you have clearly made that have meant that we haven't achieved that? You would be justified to say, right, you're on your way. But I think that there are things that they could retain in that, I think.
Yeah, maybe one for another show, but I think that the good stuff that can be retained with someone else in charge. And by his own admission, there have been a lot of things they just have got wrong. Their preparation was wrong, as you say. They've been weak on detail. They've been poor in the field. A lot of players actually haven't really moved on over the last year and a half. I mean, even Potts as an example. This is a guy who's actually quite effective for them 3 years ago. Why is he in the state that he is currently? They botched the spinner situation. They botched the Bethel situation. They didn't get the preparation right before the first test. It took them 2.5 test matches to even begin to start playing their best cricket. That is on the management. The decision making was poor all series. For the batting groups, just 300s, and the 300s were scored in broadly normal, old-fashioned circumstances as well. So yeah, I think a lot of these things that I respect their candidness, but I think it will look quite strange at a side that has talent and could have pushed this particular Australia team pretty hard, fell so short. I think it will look quite strange if you end up with the same leadership group charged and responsible for the next cycle. Anyway, that is everything from me and Ben on the daily, but we'll be back on the after show, available exclusively on the Wisden Patreon. Thanks again to RIVERSTONE for all their support across the Ashes. Luxury London living that keeps you independent, inspired, and connected. If you don't feel like slowing down but enjoy more of life, head to www.riverstoneliving.com and get in touch with them for a tour today.